Oh, well, hello, all listeners. Welcome to the new year, and all I can say to you all, Happy New Year. I really hope you all enjoyed the last year the way it was. Pretty tough for most of us, I guess, but I really hope that this new year is going to be much better for you. Okay, we are starting a little bit slower with all these lockdowns, but it's not as bad. At least we can get into the forests and do some birding. So I really hope this year those of you that have been listening to these podcasts are going to start picking up your binoculars and start birding. I think it's a great time, good time to say my New Year's resolution: start birding. If you're not already, of course. I personally had a great time with my family, and it was great birding with both my son, who came from overseas to visit, and my daughter, who hails from Pietermaritzburg. So we went around the different forests, and I must say we really enjoyed it for some of the time. But anyway, a couple of days ago, I was on the Mdoni golf course, and I was by the 12th on the 12th green, and there were a lot of swifts and martins and swallows feeding just above us in the sky. They were darting around, and they were really having a good feeding frenzy. There were quite a lot of them. I mean, must have been about a couple of hundred. And a friend turned to me and he said, how can I tell the difference between swifts, swallows, and of course I saw the martins as well, which he didn't even mention, because people kind of like ignore them because they don't seem to see them. All they basically see is swallows and possibly swifts. But there were plenty of martins around as well. So I decided what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about these three birds. That's the martins, swifts, and swallows. Okay, to carry on talking about the differences between the three, let me start with the two passerines, which is the swallows and the martins. Instead of getting very technical, I'm just going to basically say that for myself, a martin is basically a brown swallow, a very dull-looking swallow in a way. And most swallows invariably have blue plumage, which is often iridescent it's got sort of iridescent characteristics on the upper bodies and wings, but quite a few have russet coloring somewhere, whereas martins and swifts do not. As I said before, the martins are basically either a dull brown or grey with a mixture of white as well, but the swifts do not. I mean, the swifts are basically black. Well, they look black when you see them in the sky, but from underneath they're basically black, and you'll see the other also. There is actually a black swallow, but that we call a sawwing. The other thing, there's one swift. There's only one swift that we have in South Africa, which is basically very light underneath. There is a bit of white underneath, but most of the swifts, all the swifts other than that, are black underneath when seen in flight. As I said, there are a few which have a touch of white on their rumps, different sizes, different shapes. But the main problem is, when you look up at the sky and you see all three of them are silhouetted in the sky, it's very difficult to actually separate them apart. But let me see if I can help you. All of these three feed the same way. They feed on insects on the wing. So while they're flying, but the thing with swifts, they tend to fly a little longer than the swallows, and they tend to fly higher sometimes when they are doing their feeding. And the way they because they fly a lot longer, they have to have a more streamlined body, which you'll notice their body is a little bit more streamlined than the swallows, but they have these large, raked and fairly pointed, almost scythe or it's almost like a sickle-shaped wing types. So it's like sickle wing in the sky. That's sort of I think the best way to try and identify them differently from the swallows and from the martins. The word I want to mention actually is passerine. It's a terminology which is used a lot in the birding world, but to explain it easily, the reason I mention it is because a passerine or passerine, well, I'm going to say passerine or a non-passerine. A passerine is basically all perching birds. That's birds that can actually sit on a twig or on a fence or something like that. And it includes more than half of the bird species in southern Africa. The one interesting thing to know about passerines is that 3 of their foretoes point forward, and obviously the one faces backwards. But for me, the most interesting point is there's a tendon at the rear of the leg that makes the foot cool and grip when the bird lands on a branch. And I guess you could say it's much more convenient for the birds because it's more than convenient for the bird because it's a tendon locking mechanism which helps them actually sleep on the branch without falling off. So I guess that's a bit of interesting knowledge that you might want to partake. Anyway, back to these 3 species, or these 3 birds that I want to talk about. 2 of these are passerines, and that's the swallows and martins. And the reason why swift is a non-passerine is they can't perch. They've got very small feet, and they're very short. But their feet and their claws are adapted more for cleaning and sort of hanging on. They have a reversible rear toe which allows them to cling better. So they basically will fly into wherever they are and they'll cling onto the side of the cliff or their nests, and then from there they will just crawl in and then fly back out again if needed. They just drop off the ledge, where the swallows and martins will basically perch. In fact, you'll see right near the end of the season, just before migration starts, a lot of them will start perching on the wires. As you go past some of the telephone wires or electric wires, you'll see hundreds of them just sort of parking there, perching, as it were, on the wires and the wiring. The one difference between the swallows and the martins is, I guess if you really look at them closely against the sky, they really, really look very similar. But one of the differences is that the swallows tend to have a more forked and longer tail than the martins. But if you open any of the bird cards that I've actually spoken about in the past, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And you can really notice the design of the wings, which will be the main thing, which will help you and sort of decide when you start looking up into the sky. The feeding, well, I have mentioned this, but I'm going to mention again. When feeding, the swifts, they tend to spiral a lot more than the swallows and the martins. And they normally feed from much higher up, as I said earlier, than the swallows, because the swallows and martins tend to spend a lot more time closer to the ground, so they feed off the insects that come off the grass, etc. Swifts, on the other hand, do tend to stay much longer in flight. They've even been known to sleep at altitude, especially when migrating. Some swifts are actually known to stay in flight for almost most of their lives, just after fledgling, and they'll only alight when it's time for nesting. They even mate while in the air. So get a load of that. Not going to be easy, let me tell you that. But anyway, the other interesting differences they have is when they make their nests. You can always tell the difference between the nests of swallows and martins to that of the swifts. The nests of the swallows tend to be made from mud pellets, which were basically collected from the ground or wherever they can find them, and then they mix their saliva with other sources. Like, for example, you'll see them a lot coming over the water of a dam. You'll see them dipping down, or your swimming pool. They'll come down and they'll fly across the top of the water and they'll just scoop a bit of water. So they mix that in there with the pellets and their saliva, and it'll help them sort of build their nest up against, well, a lot of them, you must probably find them close to your home, under the roofs, on the side of cliffs, under bridges, things like that. And the swifts, on the other hand, only use saliva to build their nests, but they rather use like feathers and plant materials, and they do this very beautiful little cup shape against the side of the cliffs, etc. Some swallows will also do the cup shape, but they mostly have a closed chamber. You'll see under the bridges or wherever you look for these, or under your houses or overhangs. They have these closed chambers with like a tunnel. So, look out for those things and you'll see this is exactly where they nest. Some of them depends where they are at the moment, because I know that, and we all know that a lot of these swallows will migrate, especially the barn swallow, which will migrate overseas, or northern in Europe, all the way up there. The barn swallow used to be known as the European swallow. So they go a long way to go breeding, because they specifically don't breed here in southern Africa. And birds generally migrate to improve their survival chances. And obviously when weather conditions are not favorable for them, so they actually move to warmer climates during winter. But I am going to talk about migration of birds at a later stage, and I'll be covering a lot of more and in detail during that little podcast sometime in the future. So please, listen in a bit later, and we can have a little chat about that. But the rest of the swallows, they do migrate, but they don't migrate. They either stay into Africa or just laterally, or up and they just go to warmer climates within Africa, and then they will then breed over there. So in the long run, I hope it's not a difficult. I mean, it's not difficult. It is a difficult thing to actually try and explain on the radio, and I'd rather show you myself how to identify or how to look at these things. But the best way, as I said, go into the guides, one of the guides that I did mention in one of my earlier podcasts. Go and have a look at them and just study exactly what I was actually talking about, and you will see the differences between the two. You will see that the difference between the swallows and the martins. One of the biggest difference you'll see in the tails. The tails of the swallows are a bit longer and a bit sharper, more V-shaped, and the martins, what did I say? Swallows, yeah. Swallows are longer and sharper, and the martins are a bit shorter. And of course the colors are dull when you see them closer to the ground. There's a different color swift as well as the palm swift, but that's another thing altogether. But yeah, have a look and see what these things look like. So swifts, as I said before, dark sooty brown colors or grey. They can look black in the sky. They have crescent-shaped wingspan, like a sickle type shape. Some of them have got short forked tails. They're bullet-shaped, almost like a dinosaur type head if you look at them a little closer. But the one thing about them, they do shrill a lot. You'll hear them. You'll hear them way before you see them. Sometimes you hear this unmistakable, piercing, high-pitched like scream. And where is that coming from? You look up in the sky, and then you see these hundreds of these beautiful birds in the sky. It's really, really fascinating. The swallows and martins, as I said, the color is either dull with the martins or iridescent kind of blue with the swallows. When you're looking at them, just look at the swallows or the martins and see if there's any markings that are visible to try and identify the different ones, especially on their breasts. Sometimes there's a necklace or a band that crosses the bird's breast. How long are the big bird's wings? Just have a look at that. How long is the tail? Is it forked? And the rump? What color is the bird's rump? And these are the type of questions that you can actually ask yourself when you kind of look at these birds. But I am going to also deal with specific swallows, more the ones that come or stay around the houses a bit more than the others that are in the grasslands, etc., and or on the side of the cliffs, like the saving cliff swallow. So I think this is an interesting way to start, because I know that the birds are here and they're going to be swarming a lot. So it'll be very good to go in the evenings. You'll see in some valleys It's late, very late in the evening. They'll do a lot of swarming and feeding. It'll be quite great to go down there and try and identify each and every one. Take your time because they're very fast. So, but it's great, But when they do roost, as I said, they do, these swallows and the martins, then it's much easier for you to not roost when they perch. Sorry, then it's much easier to identify these things. So, listeners, glad you listened again and came back for this year, and I'll be doing this every second week on Birding with Allan. So from Big Al, I'll say cheers for now. Until next time, really looking forward to it. Ciao.